Okay, so here is a short video on checking a truck for anti-compounding function. So the first thing we need to do is talk about anti-compounding and what that actually means. Now in the previous video we talked about we had a spring inside here. For argument's sake, let's just say it's 2,000 pounds of pressure. That's pretty close to what it has. And said that's putting 2,000 pounds of force on this push rod coming out of the brake chamber for the spring brake. Okay, in the previous video, we also talked about how that on most slack adjusters, there is 6 inches from this pin to the center of the S-cam shaft. So that's going to multiply that force times 6. So do the math there and you get about 12,000 pounds of force on the brake shoes and the brake components when the parking or spring brake is set as it is right now, because it's not aired up. You can see we've got zero pressure on both sides. So compounding means more than one thing added in general. So what brake compounding is, and we used to have a problem with this way back in the day, of if the park brake was set, meaning the dash knob was out, no air pressure applied, you already had the brakes applied with, let's just say, 12,000 pounds of force. Then the truck was running, air pressure was built up, still dash knob had the park brake on, so no air pressure applied. Already got 12,000 pounds pushing on all this stuff. Then the driver steps on the brake pedal and applies air pressure to this service side of the chamber. Those two forces would compound and you would get like over double the amount of brake force on these brake components. So you would have things like these studs pulled out of the chamber, this push rod here having a big rainbow in the middle where it's bent from all the force. Something's got to give somewhere, so it's going to find the weakest point. A lot of times it would be the bracket that holds the brake chamber on broken off. Those are all indications of brake compounding. So to avoid this problem, they came out with different valve setups, and every manufacturer has come up with different ways. So it's kind of depends on how your vehicle is set up with the valves, which we'll get into in a chapter in the coming weeks. But anti-compounding is a feature so that when the park brake is on and you've got zero pressure on the spring brake side, meaning you have spring force pushing on the brakes, if we apply air pressure on the service side by stepping on the foot pedal, it's also going to apply air to the spring brake side and remove that much tension from the spring and not let it double up. So it's going to take away mechanical force to compensate for the force added with air on the other side of the chamber, if that makes sense. So let's look at how that would work. This is obviously pressure's built up on it on the board here, but the dash knob is out, so we have zero pressure up here. Mechanical force on the brakes, you can see the plunger is out. Okay. If compounding is working, when the brake pedal is pushed, then pressure will show up on both of these gauges at the same time, so that air pressure is removing spring force on one side equal to the amount of force that's put on the service brake side. Now I can't push the pedal and observe both of those at the same time. This is often going to be the case out in the real world because you're alone working on the truck and it's not like 2 or 3 team groups like what you're used to doing now in the shop here. So the service manual is going to say install gauges like what we have up here, have someone else in the shop step on the brake or use some means to push the brake pedal down. Obviously the yellow dash knob would be out, and see if air pressure shows up on both of those gauges. An alternative way to do that, instead of taking lines loose and tying these gauges in just to check for that, If I just take the line off coming to the spring brake side of this chamber on one of them, on the back here, and just take that line loose and leave it loose. Go up, you get in the cab of the truck. Like I said, don't push this in, keep it pulled out like it is because no air pressure on the spring side. And then just step on your brake pedal and listen. If you hear air coming out of that line, and you will if it has anti-compounding when you step on the pedal, when you let up on the pedal, it'll go away. That tells you have anti-compounding and it's working. So you've just tested it without hooking gauges up to it. So that's the little bit more simplified way to check for anti-compounding.